Can you believe it's November already? Welcome to The Jump. I'm Rich Bowers. We have a guest, Sydney Morris. You're familiar with her. And a special guest, Senior Program Manager of Learning and Development, Lee Evans. Good morning, Lee. How you doing?
Good morning, Rich, Sydney. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great this morning, and I hope the same for you.
Oh, wonderful. How could I not with you two with me? So, and we have an awesome topic. One that just came out earlier this week was the AI executive order. And there is a lot that went into it. And so having you both dive in and explain a little bit about the different pieces, I think is important for everybody to just be aware. So with that being said, ready to jump into it?
Absolutely.
Let's do, let's do it. All right, Lee. So when you went over the executive order, what are some highlights that you think are important for us to be aware of?
So I think there are three major highlights. When you look at this executive order that came out last week, when it relates to Gen AI moving forward, it looks like the U.S. is they're taking a step in a direction to make sure that things are safe, secure, and trustworthy as it relates to the development and use of AI. At a nutshell, that's what's happening.
Awesome. And I know the president also mentioned this is the most consequential technology of our time. And so when obviously safety then is paramount and is on everybody's foremost of their mind. What type of safety features are they implementing or trying to get implemented?
Well, so what they're doing now is they're trying to promote and demand responsible innovation, right, beforehand with respect to AI when it comes to safety and security. So, okay, Lee, what does that mean? That means that companies now are going to have to inform the government about any large-scale AI systems that are being created, and they have to share test results to prove that they don't pose a national security risk to the American people, right? So if I double click on that one time, and I just say, well, how does that happen or how does that work? These companies now are going to have to start partnering with all the different departments. For instance, Department of Energy, because now we need to make sure that AI systems don't pose a chemical, biological, or nuclear risk.
Important.
I want to eradicate cancer. I do want to do that and use Gen AI to be able to do that, but I don't want to build a bomb, right? So that is going to totally impact life science projects, all right? Department of Defense is involved. Department of Homeland Security is involved when it comes to cybersecurity threats and making sure that the infrastructure is more secure than what it is today. So there are a lot of different departments that are involved that now companies are going to have to partner with as they go forward with these large language models.
And that was one of my major takeaways when I was looking at that as well. So I'm glad you brought it up. That safety test. So it actually pulls from a law from 1950, the Defense Production Act. Are you aware? Do you know when else that this law was put into place? Like what other situations occurred? Because it is a monumental thing to put in there.
It's a very interesting thing to, because once you put in the defense production or this act here, you now are able to expedite and expand the supply of materials, funding, if you will, to promote national defense. So we're now looking at Gen AI as a national security issue. That's what's happening here. And the only other times that I had seen it were in times of war, or also when we were mobilizing vaccines during COVID. I know those were the times that I had seen it been used recently, but very interesting stuff.
Yeah, seriously, extremely important. The other time I had was the baby formula shortage. One more note on this too. I know you mentioned the resources that are going to this and innovation. Obviously, Gen AI, you kind of think innovation, artificial intelligence innovation. They are creating a national AI research resource, which will provide access to grants and other AI resources for students, learners, and even some support with the smaller companies. So very interesting. Thank you for that, Lee. Now, for Sydney, another key component was generating reports on potential labor implications of AI disruption. What are the expected steps there?
Yeah, so they're basically going to be developing principles and best practices to help mitigate harms and maximize the benefits of AI for workers. They'll be addressing job displacement, labor standards, workplace equity, and health. All of the different subjects, but I think this just shows that there's a lot of unknown and grayness in that area, and they're trying to collect as much data as possible. And it deems that there is a risk, or otherwise they wouldn't need to start this potential labor risk report.
And so it's supposed to lead to potentially supporting those whose roles may be disrupted by AI, correct? That's the whole purpose of this report?
Yes.
Okay. And then so my question to you then is when Gen AI first comes out, obviously there's people who are nervous about it and hey, it's going to take my job. And then you start seeing reports of just like previous disruptions, it will create more jobs than it will, I guess, make obsolete. Do you think that when they're including this in this proposal, I guess, really order, does this signify a concern that there may be more jobs lost to AI than initially expected?
I didn't say this until recently, but after studying up on this report, right now I am thinking so. I think there's just a lot of unknown in general. And as we discussed in the previous episodes, for instance, the autonomous trucks and workers protesting against that, it's because they're scared of losing their jobs. But I also think there is going to be more jobs created, especially as like AI specialists. This is over a lot of people's, heads in terms of like different corporations and also within the government. So I think there's going to be like certain little roles to just kind of educate people on AI, and different security roles. Absolutely, cybersecurity, any sort of security role. But is it going to be enough? Is my question.
Yeah, and who knows? They're going to do a lot of training. We can get to that in a second. But Lee, I know you're really in the weeds with this. Do you have any thoughts on that as well?
I do. I think what Sydney is saying is so true. There's a lot of unknown right now. But if you just think back to other times when automation first hit, really, when automation was one of the major things that was happening in the industry, everybody was worried that they were going to lose their jobs. But let's just take the finance industry. When they were able to come out with these different tools to do taxes, right? And do all these different things, you still had companies. They were still operating. They were just more efficient and able to do more at the same time, but you didn't have to lose everyone. Now, do I think some repetitive tasks may be in jeopardy? Yeah, for sure. But you also have the opportunity to get more engrafted into what's happening within AI and still be the professional that uses AI to do the job that you were originally doing before. So I'm more of a glass half full kind of guy on this one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I stand on it at this point, at least.
No, I appreciate those thoughts. And another one that came to mind was when the ATM was going to come and remove tellers from all banking branches, and that's something that really hasn't happened. They are also going to be doing support for personalized tutoring, not only in schools but within the government. So to give additional training on this tool, so that way, to both your points, it can make people more efficient, right? So partnering or collaborating with it. Back to you, Lee. Speaking of the government, right? Do you think the government or corporations should have the control with AI regulations?
I think to some degree they're going to have to get involved. I would prefer if it didn't have to be that way, but it is so complex what it is that you're dealing with here. So it is much more wiser to take an approach that looks at it for what it is and not necessarily what you just want it to be. So let's talk about the governing side first. Let's just talk about misinformation. Deepfakes, yeah, right?
Yep.
Deepfakes can be used to create these convincing fake videos and audio recordings of public figures, politicians, you and I, right?
Yeah.
Of things that we never actually did. And in my opinion, there's already enough happening in politics that we don't need to be scratching our head over anything that isn't real, right? So I see that to be used to spread false information. You can manipulate the public opinion, disrupt trust of these figures. So from a government side, I can see how misinformation or disinformation is a big one. Let's talk about on the personal side, though. Identity theft. Let's keep it on deepfakes just to keep it simple. On deepfakes now, it can be used for financial scams, right? Or for fraud. And you just have to recognize the ability of being able to create fake or these fake convincing videos or audio recordings to deceive people into making payments or sharing sensitive information. And then I even think about cyberbullying with that kind of thing as well. So those are just an example of how a deep fake can impact the people as well as the government. And we haven't even talked about amplifying bias, feedback loops, things like that. So just at that standpoint, I see that there may need to be a step in. It's not just for what's happening now, but the future, really the future.
I mean, excellent points. And to piggyback on there, the Department of Commerce will develop guidance for content authentication and watermarking.
Yeah.
So that is, which will clearly label AI generated content. So you're lock in step with them overall. And I want to ask you a question then following up on that, Lee, did you hear or see the telemarketing or call center artificial intelligence conversations where someone would call into them and it's actually an AI speaking and you can't even tell? Have you guys seen this?
I have
Yes.
not. I haven't seen
No.
that one yet. That's, oh man, now I got to look it up.
You do. Sydney, what were your thoughts when you heard that?
Well, I just know that what Lee said was all on point. I think that the watermark situation, what they want to do with that needs to be passed. It needs to be put in place immediately. For what I'm seeing with all these different stories, they've got to get the ball rolling on this.
And they do. And it seems like the corporations are also trying to hold up their own end of it. Last week or so, we talked about the Adobe icon, which is the watermark. Have you heard of that, Lee, or seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Have you played around with it or started putting it on your own content?
I haven't put it on it yet, but not only Adobe is doing it, but also Google, right? There are large corporations who have been pushing the U.S. and saying, hey, we want to actively regulate this, which I think is an interesting point because oftentimes they're like, no, I want to keep this internally to myself. And we'll talk about the money behind all of that and the training of data and the effort and the compute power and the networking that goes into it. It's not free. Stuff is expensive.
It is very expensive. And you're spot on. And even it said that the U.S. has been behind in addressing this. And one of the comments that I saw from the president is, one thing is clear: to realize the promise of AI and avoid the risk, we need to govern this technology. So with that, now they're catching up a little bit, it seems like. Sydney, do you think there would be more of a benefit or concern if, put it in the other hands, if the corporations controlled it, especially after what Lee just said, where they're the ones pushing some of this?
Yes. Actually, I agree with Lee. I don't like too much regulation involved, but we need to realize that the innovation has to be in the service of humanity. And with certain corporations' history of this not being an area of focus in some or a lot of cases, I think if corporations have too much power around AI, this could be a huge cause for concern. AI is such a complex technology, and it takes thorough knowledge on that subject to understand its power. And I don't think every corporation, at least right now, will be able to see that through. But then again, is the government agency that would be potentially be formed, will they be ready for the future? Will they know enough? So I think most will say that, our trust in our government has weakened tremendously recently. So who's to say that we can trust our government with proper AI regulation? It all just sounds kind of scary if you look at the corporation side and the government side and what this is all leading to.
And you have the money and the data, right? And that changes the whole narrative when you look at corporations versus government. Lee, I got the eyes response. What you add into that?
Yeah,
it's very true. Very true of what you're mentioning here, because when you really think about it, the training that has to take place for these large language models is a lot of information, a ton of data that's happening here. So now what's happening is you now have to divulge your latest and greatest methods back to the government as the company, right? Now, I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist by any means, but I'd be obtuse to say that I believe that the government is batting 1,000, right? So these checks and balances, maybe if we could put that in play, I think that would be good. But I do like the idea that the companies are already coming forward and saying, hey, we want to get on board. We want to take these measures so that we can advance safely, securely, and make sure that we are relied upon in the future, right?
Mm-hmm. Seems like a lot of question marks, right?
Yeah,
a lot of question marks.
A lot of question marks after this.
I have one last question, potentially one and then a follow-up for both of you. But Sydney, to start here, expectations that this gets passed through Congress?
Yes. The expectation is that it will make it to legislation. And in my opinion, I hope the quicker the better. People need to get educated on this and what's coming. I do know, and I made this comment earlier. This has been a warning for quite many years of AI and the danger of it and what can happen. So of course, I feel like we are still a little bit behind and what's to come. So we need to get this in legislation as soon as possible.
Okay. Yep. And then that makes sense. We'll see. Lee, if it doesn't, any implications?
Huge implications. Huge.
Yeah.
If we don't do this, then we are allowing for deep fakes to take a deeper hold. We're allowing for, amplifying bias and discrimination, right? Where Gen AI systems can inadvertently amplify prejudices and generate content that's discriminatory or harmful,
Yep.
and you're not even aware about it. Another issue that we would have to face is the feedback loop. The idea that everything that you see is just reinforced, right? So how do I want to put this? I'll put it to you this way. Within the war between Russia and Ukraine right now, right, or what's happening there, however you side, you have people in one nation who are totally unaware of what's happening in another, right? And when that happens, you still get this reinforcement bias that happens here. So the content is going to influence the behavior of the people and vice versa. And if you're not aware of that, it will happen, with or without us. So I just think that that's something that you need to be aware of as well.
You know what? That loop is something I hear a lot of concern from the development and engineer side. A lot of their concerns fall on that too. But you brought up a lot of the social concerns right there. But they need to get something going. And as we kind of wrap up here, also just to not be forgotten, is the same day that this was released, the G7 announced voluntary guidance for companies on this as well. So this is not just a us thing. This is not just the North America side of the house. It is a global concern. One last thing, when I was recently reading a book called The Precipice, and they mentioned this is one of the top 2 or 3 things that can cause crisis for humanity, right? And so if we don't get on that, we got to make sure that we land in a good spot here. So Lee, Sydney, hope you guys had fun. Until next time, take care. I'm Rich Bowers. This is The Jump.